Bob Livingston. I was city manager in University Park from 1991 to 2014, about 24 years, 23 years. Grew up in southeast Kansas, attended the University of Kansas on a swimming scholarship, completed my undergraduate work there, was immediately drafted by the Army, spent 2 years in the Army, first in San Francisco and then about a year in Vietnam as a computer programmer. I was lucky that I was not out in the field. Returned, had been working for the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation as a bank examiner. I had an accounting degree from the University of Kansas. Decided that I wanted to make a career change, and fortunately through the GI Bill I was able to go back to college full-time. Got a master's degree in public administration in the program at the University of Kansas, which has consistently been the #1 program for managers in the United States since the 1950s, and was one of the first programs. And then worked a series of jobs, first as an assistant manager, finance director in a couple of cities, worked in Oregon, California, up to Illinois as an assistant there. Then my first manager's job was in Dodge City, Kansas. I was there for about 6 years, took a manager's job in Santa Paula, California, from 86 till 91, and then in 91 moved here as the city manager after Leland Nelson retired. When we moved here, our oldest son was a senior in high school, and that was kind of interesting because we offered him the chance to stay. We moved at semester of his senior year. He had been here, but we had offered him the chance just to stay back in California and finish high school there. We could have worked that out, but he wanted to come, and he'd already made a decision to go undergraduate at the University of Kansas, so it was closer anyway. But we were looking for a place we could move to that had good schools, and our kids were of an age. Our second son was I think in the 8th grade, and our daughter was in the 5th or 4th grade. And so, that allowed us to kind of move in and become part of the community, because particularly our middle son was very active. He was a swimmer at the high school, and so we were involved with groups there. There were other chances just because we lived in the community and were around that it made it very easy to kind of transition into the city as opposed to living outside of the city. And I know one of the questions I'll never forget that I got during the interview from I think it was probably Pete Goldman, that was on the council at that time, later became mayor, is he said, would you be willing to live in the community? And of course, we had a little advantage coming from California. Housing prices were pretty comparable. And so I said, sure, that was the reason we wanted to move here, was to get our kids in the schools and be able to live in the community. We weren't interested really in living outside of the community. Well, I think, the first thing that I always remember is that when I was interviewing for the job, I'll never forget, I was working in California and the phone rang one afternoon, and it was Leland, who was the manager here at that time. And he was going through the process of that I was going to be invited for an interview. And I'll never forget, Leland told me, he says, "This is the best job you will ever have." And I must have repeated that usually I would meet with new employees because, we only had about 250 employees, so you'd meet them all when they came to work and get to know them. And I tried to tell every one of them that this would be the best place they would ever work in their lives, which was shown by low turnover rates. People came here and stayed 20, 30, 40 years routinely.
Yeah, which is extremely.
So anyway, from that, it was a great organization. It was a great organization when I came here. My main goal was to try to not mess it up. And Leland had done an excellent job of putting it together. He'd been here 20 years. The stability really served the community well. And you know, and you had great leadership the whole time too. The mayors and the council were all just, you know, they're all had good backgrounds, understood the municipal operation, wanted to make the place better. Really wanted to, didn't really have any political agenda. They just wanted the community to be good. You know, the first thing you have to look at is the fact that the councils here have a continuity. It's not like it's somebody coming in totally outside of the realm. They've been involved. Most of the council members you already know when they run because they've been involved either in planning commission or one of the other committees of the city. They've gotten in and gotten involved. That, I think, helps add stability because they know who you are, you know who they are. And by doing that, you get this continuity. And some people I know, and it seems like today that maybe that's viewed as a negative, that, you know, we've got to have term limits and all that, and you know, we need to get rid of people and turn them over. But on the other side, in this case, you've got all this institutional history that understands why things have occurred a certain way, and why you're doing it that way. And yeah, there's a certain not wanting to change that comes with that, but in a lot of times the reason you're doing it that way is, you know, is just because you know that will work for this community. And that, I think that's the thing that people lose sight of a lot of times is this is a community, it has a unique response to how it wants its issues handled. Another community may want a different way of handling it. Of course, a manager needs to kind of be able to read those differences and deal with them. But I just thought of a deal, and you may or may not be able to use this, but I'll never forget, because of Leland and his being here and having a good relationship with him still living in the community when I retired, you know, and we were both University of Kansas graduates. We'd known each other for some period of time before I took the job here. And, you know, and we remained friends long after he retired until his death. And you know, and he told me things that had happened, and I'll never forget, I got a call from Jan Hart at the time, that was the manager at the city of Dallas, and Jan had been approached as to why, when we built Central Expressway, that there had been a wall built on the west side of the street, or on the west side of the expressway, and why that was over this way versus further to the east. Well, and Leland had explained to me at the time, that, and just in a conversation we'd had one day, that Central Expressway alignment was changed because they were going to have to go into some of those large office buildings over on the east side of Central if they kept the alignment they had for the widening. And so there was an accommodation worked out between the city of Dallas and the city of University Park to move that onto University Park land, take homes over here. We condemned, I think when I came to town, I purchased 11 properties over there. Just, I went out, signed for them, you know, the city, under the agreement that the city would, you know, would buy them, but we purchased about 11 properties down that, and I was able to tell Jan, I said, well, here was the deal. We agreed to move that thing over on our property, but we wanted a sound wall down that side, and that's why that wall is there, so that we wouldn't have that noise encroaching on the neighborhood. And I said, you know, it kept Central out of those office buildings that are, you know, huge tax revenue for the city of Dallas. And when you have that continuity and long term like that, you know, just stuff like that happens. And that was probably a good thing, because I think that could have probably been an issue if somebody had really wanted to pick it up, but there was a good answer for it. I think the other thing that a lot of people don't appreciate is the dedication of the staff here. And, you know, and admittedly, most of them don't live in town. I've had very few department heads that ever lived in the community. But, we would have a problem in the middle of the night. I remember the snowstorm when we had tree limbs down all over town, windstorms where that's occurred. And, I lived here in the community and would be downtown, or, would be down to usually to City Hall shortly after it started happening. And, I had department heads living out in Rockwall, Garland, the Colony, and, I would turn around at 2 o'clock in the morning and those department heads would be here. And the employees that lived outside of the community would start showing up. Once they knew we had a problem, yeah, we had call-out lists and you could call people, but most of the time you didn't even need to call. They just came. When I came, they had just started trying to, the town was 50 years old. The initial constructions had been kind of what was good quality at the time, but it had not served well over the years. Water and sewer lines were 50 plus years old. They were having a lot of problems with breaks, failures in the system and everything. And prior to my arriving, they had come up with the concept of trying to replace those lines. It was fortunate at the time I was here that we were able to essentially pay off some bonds that had been issued during Leland's tenure to begin that work. And the council was gracious enough and I think smart enough to see that if we just retained that rate on the tax rate that we'd been using to pay the bonds and instead put it into a sinking fund to pay for that improvement, that would allow us to convert over to essentially a cash basis on all of that work, and we wouldn't be faced with the cost of bonding and going through elections and everything else. So we were able to make that transition, work that out, and so we were able to replace a lot of infrastructure, both water towers, which were critical kind of to maintaining the system, and over the period of time we begin to see the number of breaks in the water and sewer lines, number of failures go way down. We were able to replace a lot of the street paving. All of Preston Road out here was repaved. All of Lover's Lane was repaved, and they were put back in concrete, and Hillcrest. They were put back in concrete that will last for many years. And so those were always, it was good to see that work go on. But I think the other favorite thing was just continuing to build the organization. We had good department heads when I came. We were able to replace them with good people. In a lot of cases, they took it to another level when they came in. Gary Adams, that we hired as police chief, was able to get the department certified. It's a CALEA certified department now. At that time, there probably weren't 5 other cities in the state of Texas that had that certification. Randy's done similar things in the fire department and public works, and that operation has had several good success there too. Our finance operations were always received national recognition on their accuracy and performance. So we were just able to kind of step things up a little notch. Probably the longest and largest project that I was involved in was City Hall. There was a lot of opposition to it in the neighborhood, and yet and we just, I learned through that process, you just need to take your time, listen to what the complaints are, and then I think in the end we were able to address those complaints and do a nice improvement in the park, and and modify the project some to make it fit more with what the residents were willing to live with. And I doubt today that there's a lot of complaints about it. It's a municipal building in the middle of a residential neighborhood, so it's that wouldn't be where you would pick to put it if you could, but That's the way it evolved here when they originally built the community and put the city hall there. But I think through that process, you learn kind of how to, it was a growing experience for me because we just had to adapt and move as we went through it and figure out ways around the problem. The city hall had been last remodeled in 1970. The technology from 70 to the 90s was, had just exploded, and we had computer systems sitting in closets and no real solid backup generation on the building. Not enough space for a lot of the operations. We hadn't really grown a lot employee-wise, but we just didn't have room for the technology, and it wasn't isolated. And we'd been lucky with a hire of Jim Criswell as our IT director, and then also with Jerry Bradley, our park director. And working with them, we were able to come up with a plan for a remodeled city hall. Added about 50%, I think. I want to say we went from, I can't remember the square footage now, but anyway, didn't double the square footage, but probably went up 50, 75%. We're able to integrate all the technology and the wiring into the building, get everything on a backup generator so that when we had a power outage, it was seamless, everything changed over, we didn't lose anything. And that was a great project. It was interesting trying to work through it, let us all fit, and remodel the building while we were in it. So it was complicated, and there were a lot of moving parts, but we got through it, and it turned out, and that building, I think, will serve them well for another period of time. You always need to upgrade, but it really helped out, so that was fun. And then doing this building was, or this facility, the library. University Park didn't have a library. It was a constant issue, but the problem in the community was that there's not any, the community's completely built out, so you have no place to really repurpose. You're limited there's not a lot of commercial area, so there's really not a good place to go in and be able to build and not have a series of problems over the construction. And fortunately, we were able, thanks to the Caruth family, Mike Geisler, Venture Properties that operates this center, we just kind of fell into a deal with them that if you walk through the center, you'll notice that there's a lot of brick pavers and stuff like that in the crosswalks, which are not essentially allowed for maintenance in University Park, but the city owned all the street right-of-ways in this center. So we were able to make a deal with them to essentially trade those street right-of-ways, allow them to maintain them the way they wanted to maintain them, put the finishes in they wanted to put in for the center, and in trade for that we got essentially this floor and a half of another floor in the building to put a library in. Most people think of a library, you've got a building and it's all that, and you kind of had to think outside of the box to make it work. But I think the community's adapted to it. I think they like it, they use it. As Sharon indicated, their circulation numbers continue to increase. And it was a unique deal, and fortunately, we had money that had been set aside in a gift to the city that was about $1 million. So with us not having to pay for these 2 floors, that's under, it's a condominium arrangement where we own the floors, and then we have the HOA fees that are substantial, but they pay for a lot in the center, all the landscaping, security, Christmas decorations, all of that. It allowed us to essentially use that money, that $1 million, pretty much furnished or finished out this library. So we were really out up front, very little cash. So, it worked out well. And again, if the Caruth family hadn't been willing to kind of kick into that and accept it, because obviously they gave up rentable space here in 2 floors of the building, but it made it work. It provides a place of gathering. It provides, as Sharon was talking earlier, it'll provide, classes for the community. I think the children's library section has been really critical here, and that's filled a need that really wasn't available before. They didn't have access to it. And they've constantly run classes, they have story time, contests for the school kids. I think it just was something in a community of the class that University Park was missing. And we were able to fortunately figure out a way to make that work, given all the limitations we had in the community as far as space. This library, it's here, it's operating. I think it's a benefit to the community. The improvements to City Hall have made that a lot better operation. We dealt with floodplain issues, everything else down through there. So that whole project really improved that area. We had some flooding problems in homes down there that have now been handled. And then just the infrastructure, the reliability that we put in place as far as water and sewer, of, being able to pretty much assure the residents that they'll be able to get water and sewer service no matter what the conditions are. Again, the city has a long, stable heritage of managers and council members, and I think, you need to keep that in mind when you're considering what you want to do, where you want the city to go, how you want it to improve, and just remember the history to a good extent, but be adaptable to the future and what's happening. And I think, again, we've been very lucky here. There hasn't been a council member that I dealt with in 24 years or whatever that wasn't what they wanted. It was, they wanted to make the community better. They didn't have any issues. Mostly, I don't think any of them ever came in with an issue of a particular problem they wanted to solve. They just wanted to make University Park better. And maybe that's the real key to the council, is they came in not wanting to particularly deal with a problem, but wanting to make the community better.